Hey there. So my next guest may possibly be the smartest person I've had on this show. He used a lot of big words, so make sure you have your dictionary handy for this one. This was a fantastic interview talking about data science and the interplay with data science and the gaming space and esports and marketing and just kind of all over the board. Really fun, knowledgeable guy. I know you're going to love this one. Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Gamerpreneur podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Carlton. Today, we have a very special guest with us. We have Jonathan Stringfield. Hey there, Jonathan. How's it going?
Hey, man. How are you?
It is a beautiful sunny day in Las Vegas. How about yourself?
Good. Looking pretty good in New York. Nice morning to be here.
Wonderful. All right, so Jonathan, I don't like doing a lot of small talk on the show. I like going just straight into it. So why don't we begin by just telling us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. So professionally, I oversee global business marketing, measurement research, and insights at Activision Blizzard across our media and esports businesses. So do a lot of talking about the power of gaming platforms, et cetera, to people that don't really understand or aren't that close to the gaming community. So I think something kind of near and dear to your heart. In my off time, I like to write about kind of that intersection between gaming, marketing, analytics, and esports. Like if you look at a Venn diagram in the middle of that, that's like tends to be where I'm most powerful. And I'll be joining the Pompeia School of Business at the University of New Haven in the fall, teaching esports marketing.
Fantastic. Okay, that gives us quite a bit to talk about. Before we do that, though, I start every interview with a single question. So I'm going to ask you, just like I ask everybody else. So again, please don't feel special. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being high, how weird are you, Jonathan?
So as a survey methodologist, like scales like this, they just don't jive with me. But I think, in the grand scheme, I'm probably like a solid 7 or 8. But it also depends on what you mean by weird, and also depends on who you're asking. So that's why after the fact, once we're off here, we got to talk about the question. We got to talk about how you're setting it up, how the analytics work. Like we need to workshop that a little bit.
I'll tell you, most people don't even fit within the range. They're usually like 12, 17, 1,000.
Oh, well, hell, I'm normal then. Great.
Right? Okay, so this is the Gamerpreneur podcast. So I do need your gaming cred, aside from the fact that you have all kinds of current cred. When did you first start playing video games?
I was a original Nintendo Entertainment System kid, late 80s. So Legend of Zelda, all of that started quite early, carried it through my entire life.
Okay, and what do you play today, if anything? Do you even have time to play?
I do, and quite a bit. So right now I'm working through Mass Effect Legendary Edition. I played all of them before, doing it again, because my backlog isn't big enough, apparently. So after that, Ghost of Tsushima is kind of high on my list. And then, of course, Diablo 2, the reboot. I almost failed out of college playing the first one. So hopefully I don't lose my job this time around, but definitely excited to revisit that chapter.
Love it. Okay. And kind of one more gaming question, then we'll kind of get to the entrepreneur part. If you had to pick one game, we'll go desert island scenario. You're stuck on a desert island. You get one game the rest of your life. Which one is it?
Typically, I'm terrible at favorites, but this one's actually kind of easy, and it's Ultima 7 on the PC. And the reason for that is it's, in my mind, still one of the best RPGs ever made. Still one of the best worlds ever created. It was really kind of like what got me like really deeply into gaming. It also has like personal significance. I used to play it a lot with my mom. So like it's kind of like that perfect intersection between like nostalgia and personal value and just being like an amazing game in general. Also, again, like I think probably a lot of folks on your show probably like skew a little bit younger. Unless you had to load these games on DOS and screw around with boot disks and play with autoexec.bats and sysconfigs, like gamers, and particularly PC gamers back in the day, we damn near had to have degrees in computer science. So like I also like to do the shout out there that it's like, listen, I was playing games when this stuff was rough.
I love it. I'm a little bit. I was on the cusp of that myself, so I do remember everything you just said. Beautiful. Let's get over to the preneur part because that's what we're really here for. Could you give me your professional background? How did you end up doing where you're at now? So you nearly dropped out of college thanks to Diablo, and then you're here. So what's that middle part?
Yeah. So I mean, I would say early on in my career, so my background's actually in sociology, and I hold a PhD in sociology, so which kind of feels strange at first gloss, but realistically, any kind of social science, but again, I'm biased towards sociology, tends to not only have a heavy quantitative research component, but one that really kind of works with what's the meaning of what you're trying to do, right? So I kind of set that up because, early on in my career, I started doing measurement research at Nielsen, so the folks that do the TV ratings, right? So if you think about what a TV rating is, it's like how many people watch it over how many people possibly could watch it. So I figured out that part, right? So it's basically the science of demography. I made denominators for a living, right? But what I found, what I was good at, was taking things that were fairly esoteric, like statistical analyses and analytics and whatnot, and relating them to humans, right? So what I found from there is that, that's a easily transferable skill, right? So after that, I went to work at a couple of social networks early on. I was early on at Facebook and Twitter, and they're like really working in a capacity where I talked about research and things like that to folks. So being able to take, like, again, things that folks understand, things that are fairly esoteric, and relate them to folks in a fairly like meaningful way is one of those skills that, you can kind of apply it across a wide variety of potential professions, inclusive of gaming, where, kind of as noted, I wear a lot of hats in my current role, but one of the biggest ones is like talking to folks about gamers. And it probably won't surprise you to know that it's very misunderstood outside of the gaming communities and people that are familiar with it.
Okay, so I have a question. When you're out there talking to folks about gamers, do they understand most of what you're saying?
Sort of. So, I mean, like you got to translate it, right? So, as a practical example, folks are, and we did some research on this. Folks are very, excuse me, when I say that, I mean like people outside of like gaming that don't really understand it. They're very ardent on like this label of gamer, and when they want to look at the industry, they're like, "We want to talk to gamers." Folks that are probably watching your show know. Not a lot of people identify as gamers. In fact, we found that less than half of people that play games identify as a gamer per se. And that's an important distinction. So the way that I translate it to, someone who's not familiar with the community, it's like, okay, you may also want to speak to people that watch movies, but strictly speaking, you're not going to look for cinephiles, right? Because a lot of people that watch movies aren't cinephiles per se. They don't identify like that. And what we're trying to do is like make that connection that like, look, you can't, one, pigeonhole people, and then two, like recognize that folks that are playing games, like this isn't this like weird esoteric activity. It's everyday entertainment to them. People like myself, right, that are lovingly be called like geriatric millennials or what have you, folks that are kind of like late 30s, like we grew up with this. We're now professionals. We got kids. We're stockbrokers, lawyers, and what have you. Many of us carried this with us. So to me, sitting down and playing like Mass Effect or what have you in the evening is no different than flipping on a movie. So it's like, it's those little cognitive, cues for folks that aren't as familiar with it that we're really trying to convey that, like, again, this is entertainment to me. It's not, again, just some kind of weird thing that I'm doing in a basement or what have you, though consequently I do play games in a basement, but that's an aside.
So I love that because, when people ask me, how do I reach gamers? I'm like, well, there's no such thing as a typical gamer. It's people with a hobby, but you're taking it a little step further. You're saying it's not even necessarily people with a hobby, it's just people. And it just happens to be a large number of those people.
I mean, let's call it what it is. That it kind of goes beyond that, it's mobile gamers too, right? And that's one of these things where, like, there's a lot of otherism in the game community. Like, oh, mobile gamers aren't real gamers, et cetera. But, I mean, again, they're all folks that are fundamentally within the same hobby. And let's also recognize that, gaming is an activity starting to increasingly get divorced from the gaming device, right? So, not today, maybe not 10 years from now, but eventually we're going to be in a world where you can play the same relative game experience on your phone, your TV, et cetera, right? So all of these distinctions that, we as gamers like to put up, one, are kind of deleterious to like how we're understood, but then also as the, larger kind of like popular culture kind of looks into gaming, being able to have these accessible points, and again, mobile's a good one because almost everyone has a phone, and there are really great AAA experiences that are on mobile phones. You start to kind of, paint this roadmap that, again, this isn't like a weird hobby. Like, everyone does it. And like the classic, it's kind of a hokey exercise, but like if I'm going to speak at like an ad agency or some business or what have you, you'll do that exercise of like, okay, how many people here consider themselves a gamer? Like, what? 1 out of 10 people are going to raise their hand, right? We're like, cool. How many people have a smartphone? Everyone raises their hand. How many people on that smartphone do you have a game of some type? And almost everyone keeps their hand up. I'm like, congrats, you're gamers. So again, like starting to understand that like there's various levels, various needs, and in various ways in which people are kind of entering the ecosystem, and realistically making sure that like we're kind of welcoming to that, I think is vital for gaming becoming not something that's like a little bit on the periphery, but more the center of culture.
What do you think the biggest challenge is in order to making this more better understood? Is it like that media stereotype? Is it parents? Like where is this disconnect? Because it's something like 3/4 of houses in the United States have a gamer in it. Something like 90% of high school students are considered gamers, right? So why is it we're having this difficulty making this transition to we're not all these big bad like nerds?
I think there's a couple different things. So one, as an industry, the gaming industry in itself has always kind of been othered by the dominant entertainment industry, which is to say movies, TV, and what have you. And a lot of people have written a lot of very eloquent things about that. So like gaming in and of itself as like that core business has always just kind of been like an offshoot. And it therefore got like a little kind of cloistered and kind of doing its own thing. But that kind of was an interesting incubation, right? That if you look at how the gaming industry has developed, a lot of like cutting edge technological development has been happening there, right? And again, I think people like to point to like flashy things like VR and AR as an indicator of that, but even like digital distribution of goods, right? Like that's so very normal to folks now in terms of how they're consuming movies or whatnot. But like realistically, it was gaming that kind of like mastered that at the onset. And then if you look at, kind of the cultural cues, like I think it's a generational effect, right? That, our parents grew up with this conception that games were a waste of time. But now you have, a new cohort of folks that are coming up. And again, folks like myself, late 30s, I'm a parent, etc. And again, gaming isn't something that like, obviously my relationship was much deeper in it, but it is the case that like I recognize that it has value, right? Like I learned to read playing Dragon Warrior on NES, right? And I was reading at an adult level in grade school as a result. So I know that like if you channel gaming in the right way, as with any entertainment, like it can do great things for kids. So you look at that, you look at, again, the development of like things like esports programs at universities. You look at the fact that like being able to make a living doing something that you're passionate about, i.e. gaming via podcast or streaming or what have you, is now not just mainstream, but a more viable, potential route for folks. Like these are all kind of the cultural anchors that means like this is something that isn't just kind of like a subculture that's in arcades or in basements or what have you, but something that's becoming more popular. So when I go out there, like I almost like, kind of channel my inner Thanos that like, this is inevitable. Like gaming's a thing, it's coming. It's whether or not like, again, the business community is ready or realistically, whether the gaming community is ready for that.
Okay. On that note, are they ready? I don't know if you have that kind of information. You say that we're cloistered by the more traditional entertainment industries, but gaming is the largest entertainment industry, bar none. It's bigger than movies and television combined. So is it just business savvy?
I mean, here too, I think we could point to any number of things, but I think where you're seeing kind of the clearest indicators that this is something that's becoming a little bit more cognizant of like decision makers across a wide variety of businesses, inclusive of entertainment, is that one, look at IP sharing, right? We could sit here and list out all of the various gaming platform or gaming properties that are coming to TV and entertainment. It's longer than it's ever been, right? So on the one hand, you have that, and that's always been kind of going on. And it's always been a little bit not awesome in terms of like how some of these translated, but like recent examples, like it's getting good. I think there's a recognition that the storytelling that's happening in gaming is as good, if not better, than a lot of the things that are going on in the movie or the television industry. So you kind of have that. And then you have that rather famous quote from Netflix, who kind of went out there and said, like, listen, our competition is an HBO. It's like Fortnite, right? And again, like, I think it's easy to kind of look at that and be like, oh, they're scared of Fortnite, but that's not the point. Their point was that how consumers are becoming entertained is much more diversified beyond just sitting there and passively receiving content. That wasn't commentary on Fortnite per se. That was commentary that forms interactive entertainment, i.e. gaming, is becoming increasingly important and increasingly part of individuals' entertainment ecosystem. And that's a threat if you're a Netflix that, again, part of what you do is just try to get people to consume content on your platform.
Love it. Okay. Now, Jonathan, this show is also supposed to be largely about the person I'm talking to, not just kind of the big wider world of gaming. So I'd like to talk a little more personally if I can. So You were at Nielsen, you worked for Facebook. How did you end up in the gaming space, specifically, how did you embrace this passion for gaming when you were just kind of a data science nerd?
I mean, so, the easy part is obviously like gaming is something that I've kept up with my entire life. So, right. So, when you're passionate about something, you're always going to be kind of like sharp in terms of not just it as a pastime, but also like the business of it. Right. So in particular, because, a lot of what my job was at like the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world was working with like big Fortune 500 brands and talking about data and talking about research and talking about consumer behaviors. What I had to get very good at was, understanding the larger ecosystem of competing platforms, right? So on the one hand, those other social platforms. On the other hand, as noted, and apropos to the Netflix example, it was a little bit of like, where else is time being taken up? And like, professionally, I saw, the same headlines that you were just talking about, right? Like, a couple of years back, whatever they said, oh, gaming's bigger than, the music industry. And everyone's like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. And the year after that, oh, gaming's bigger than the box office. And everyone was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And the year after that, gaming's bigger than the box office and the music industry combined. And yet all of these Fortune 500 brands were like, okay, like they didn't really have like the same focus on that, relative to where I was at the social platform. So, the opportunity kind of came up as, many of these things do based upon professional acquaintances or what have you that, realistically at Activision Blizzard at the time, they were really trying to strengthen that muscle memory of reaching out to the business community and talk about like where opportunities were, whether it be advertising or media placements or what have you. And again, it's something that I jumped at because one, something I'm super passionate about, but then two, because also like that seems like something that, we need to have that dialogue about because right now we're kind of at the early innings and like, again, this is going to continue to be up and to the right. So it's really just a matter of like, how quickly can we get on that train?
Beautiful. Now, say someone wants to do what you do. They would like to follow in your footsteps. What advice would you have for them in order to, do this data science as well as kind of do it in the gaming space if possible?
I mean, I think, having the core skills is good. I think almost as important is how you talk about it and work with people around the skills. Again, that whole concept of, being able to take complicated things and relate them to other humans, it's super, super valuable. And again, something that kind of pays dividends almost regardless of your background. So on the one hand, like, yes, that we could talk about like all the esoteric skills that go along with it, but also having that frame of mind of like, how do you talk to people about it? And then how do you make it meaningful to them? And again, here too, that's one of these things that I do a lot of in my professional life, but something that fundamentally is, something that is applicable to so many professions. That's, how do I know what you're trying to get out of a conversation, a business deal, of what have you, and make sure that like, one, you're getting the information you need, and then two, you see the value at it. Because fundamentally, a lot of what my work is like defining value for folks and demonstrating that they are getting value out of a given relationship.
Okay, fantastic. Now, what makes you good at this? I mean, other than the fact that you may be the person with the biggest vocabulary on my show so far, no one's ever said apropos before this episode. What makes you unique or special that you are good at this position?
I mean, I think, being able to focus on the areas where kind of like you have your niche is important, right? And I think, like I mentioned it before, like I do a lot of writing. Like I currently have like a newsletter, Substack. It's like stringfield.substack.com that, if people want to check it out, please do. But again, it's like one of these things where you have like marketing, right? Analytics, gaming, esports. You look at the combination of those, like that's kind of my jam. There's always going to be someone who's more knowledgeable about marketing. There's certainly people that are more knowledgeable about gaming. Sure as hell people more knowledgeable about analytics or esports, but the combination of which, like, that's where I shine. So I think when I talk with young professionals or what have you, it's like also finding like what's that area that like, again, you don't want to get too narrow because, the other thing that I'll quickly tell folks is like keep options open because that's how you develop as a professional. But also as you get a little bit further in your career, as you get a little older, such as myself, starting to understand like where you can specialize and where you can get the most value. Like that's where I think you're one, going to find the most satisfaction, but two, find something that you're really good at. So call it luck or what have you, like being able to find the area that I can kind of focus in and kind of having like that self-awareness of like, okay, this is where I can do good work is I think kind of what makes me what I am.
Yeah, wonderful. Please stop calling yourself older. You're only a couple of years older than me.
I mean, like I work with like folks that strictly speaking are like in their 20s. So like, and again, like I work in tech, which means that I consistently work with folks that are basically in their 20s. So as I continue to be very much not 20, They love to remind me that I'm not, in fact, in my 20s anymore. We'll leave it at that.
Okay. Now let's talk about that intersection of the data science, the marketing, esports. Where's esports going? Because I'm seeing a lot of problems with it, and there's a lot of blinders on in this space.
I mean, I think it's at that inflection point that, obviously lots of passion in the industry. One could fairly credit that, like, a lot of what fueled that early growth was that passion. And then what follows from passion is a lot of folks that see the business opportunity and want to move into it. And somewhere in between there is that, there are a lot of fundamental gaps in our knowledge about what esports can or should be, how consumers interact with it, what's the value they're getting out of it, and like what's the potential trajectory on it. Which again isn't to say that there's not a ton of great work that's going on with it in that regard, but I think realistically, when I'm thinking about it, and again, I'm a researcher by training, so when I see a problem, I think through a research lens, is that what's needed is more understanding. What's needed is more kind of fundamental intel and insights about, like, how do we make the business ecosystem strong? How do we best serve the customers, whether they're fans or otherwise? And then how do we connect it up in a responsible way to advertisers and sponsors and what have you that, have an interest in really kind of like working with this community. So, again, like any upstart business industry, like there are a lot of bumps, there's a lot of turbulence, and that's one of these things that's going to make it exciting. But also, it's one of the most exciting and fastest growing potential, entertainment, wide scale entertainment sources out there. So, I think what I try to like temper is like, let's keep that passion, let's keep that excitement, but let's balance it with, again, good prudence and intel and insight and research, and start to really kind of pack those facts in, because that's what's going to really set the foundation to make this what it could and should be, which is, again, mainstream entertainment.
Wonderful. All right, and you will be teaching in the fall, and your class will be focusing primarily on esports. And so what exactly will you be covering?
So, I thought a lot about it, that like any good university, they kind of said, like, we want to teach, for an esports curriculum about marketing, right? And, there wasn't like a heavy hand, like, this is what it should be and what have you, which is, again, exactly what you'd expect. So I kind of went through the, thought process of like, okay, what's going to be valuable, right? Like, sure, there's a lot I could talk about, my own experience and what have you, but also as an educator, you need to make sure that you're preparing any given student with skills, right? And then apropos to what I was just speaking about before, like, we want to make sure that these skills are something that are fundamentally going to strengthen the industry and the business. So it was definitely the case that I didn't want to just make this like an ongoing, like, we're just going to talk about case studies of like cool activations and esports and what have you. Because like, sure, there's value in it, and sure, we're going to talk about case studies, but like, that's not going to provide them with the intel that if they're starting at like, an esports org or want to start their own tourney or coming to Activision Blizzard, like, they're not going to have any real skills for that. So it's a course that, fundamentally we're talking about marketing, right? We're looking through a sports marketing framework, not because I believe that like sports marketing is 100% how esports should be done. However, sports marketing has a lot of the ways of thinking which are good for folks to think through when they think about consumers, fan experiences, and things like that. And we're talking a lot about research, and we're talking a lot about how we can go into and understand consumers and what they want out of a given experience, because again, fundamentally so very valuable, I think, for the future of esports, but also super translatable that, again, students may come out of that program, change their mind, or there might not be a job available. And I want to prepare them that they could go to any other marketing org and still be effective, because they have those baseline skills of understanding like a good framework for marketing, but also a good framework for conducting research.
Great, and absolutely needed in this space. There's too many people who just don't understand marketing. They're just kind of going out there and hoping it works. A little more personally, if we can.
Sure.
Say that you and I pop into a time machine. We're going to go back in time to, say, your Diablo 1 days. And you're going to be able to talk to little Jonathan back then. You're going to be able to tell him all of the ups and downs, all the good and the bad, all of the triumphs and challenges that you've had along the way. You're going to impart all of your wisdom and knowledge to him. But if there was only one thing you could tell him that would make him bigger, badder, faster, more successful, whatever your definition of that is, what would you tell him?
It's one of these things where I've, certainly had a bunch of screw ups in my life. And again, as noted, like, almost failed out of my undergraduate program because, like so many folks that, go to college, they don't always focus on their studies or get engrossed in a game or what have you, and things kind of fall. But corrected it, did what I needed to do, built from it. So long and short, like, I think it's probably the easy trap is to like, tell them, oh, don't do that, like avoid those failures. But those are all going to be very like, those are fundamental to what we become as humans. So I'm not trying to get too philosophical, but it's like, I ain't going to tell him anything because he's got to screw up a lot. Otherwise, like, you're not going to become anything decent, right? Like, no one just strictly succeeds. No one goes through life without having any mess ups. And, again, if it's the case where all of a sudden you start avoiding those or whatnot, like, who knows what kind of monster is going to come out the other end of that. So tell them good luck, have fun.
For sure. I love that answer. And on that note, failure. You see, Jonathan, I actually believe that we learn the most in our life from our failures, not necessarily our successes. Because when you succeed the first time at something you try, you may not get the lesson, right? But when you fail, you got to learn from it. You got to iterate. You got to be able to move forward in order to succeed the next several times, right? So I'd like to ask you, what do you consider your biggest failure in life? And what did you learn from it?
My biggest failure, I would say that early on in my career, I was too focused on what I felt like I should be and how others should think about my work and not about me as like a professional larger ecosystem. So by that, what I mean is, early on in my career, I was, again, in a very kind of esoteric discipline. It was basically data science before data science was a thing. And really kind of had like this belief that it's like, well, the work should speak for itself, right? Like everything I'm doing is so smart and good. Like, of course, everyone's going to be able to see it and think it's awesome, et cetera. And I've seen a lot of folks that are in a similar discipline. And again, I, strictly speaking, had the privilege of working with some of the smartest people in like research and analytics in the world. Some are kind of in that disposition, some aren't. And what happens is when you're kind of in that, like, hey, I do awesome work, I'm great, everything that I do should just kind of speak for itself. One, that's never true. So like you need a big dollop of humility. And then two, it's the case that at a certain point, you do have to kind of advocate for your work. And you do have to kind of like, again, not just sit on an island, but reach out to others in terms of what it means. So I think my biggest failing, and probably one of the things that really slowed down my career at the get-go, was just blind arrogance in that regard, right? That, again, I was going to be, this super hyper technical type person. I didn't need to relate to, these salespeople or whatnot. They're idiots. What do they know, et cetera? And that's not true, right? These are just people with different skill sets that's useful to be able to work with. And once you get through that, once you kind of break through your own bullshit, then it gets a lot better that you can talk with different folks in different ways and again, start to create those bridges and become someone who's a little bit more centralized in an org instead of being kind of like a backhouse specialist that, is a little curmudgeon-y and doesn't like talking with humans.
Fantastic. Do you like talking to humans?
Yes and no. So like I'm actually a crushing introvert, but I play an extrovert on TV. So like I feel like I do a very convincing job of like seeming like I'm not, but like not like I'm very much in the case, like, practical example, a lot of folks on your show, like, are streamers and whatnot. Love what they do. Not for me. That's my time. I like, once I'm gaming, like, I got to just be away from folks because that's how I recharge, doing it on my own.
All right. Love it. On the flip side of the failure question, what is something that you're working to improve on yourself today?
I think what I'm trying to do right now is, kind of focus on the things where I get a lot of personal edification from the work that isn't strictly tied to, a given task or, what's something that's directly in front of me. So like, I'm someone who's like, and again, I think this comes from like the framework of growing up in gaming and in particular, like RPGs, that tends to be my jam, that like, I'm all about like progression, building, focusing on things for a bigger outcome. So like little incremental things don't excite me. Having like a big scary goal does, right? So what that means is like, I'm trying to do a lot of like, again, writing because it's something that I find I like it. I get a lot of personal edification from it and it's valuable as a professional, right? So it is one of these things that, I got some projects that are kind of brewing on that side, inclusive of like, some of my Substack thing that I'm kind of putting out there. But like, it's something that, again, even if it isn't like something that really kind of takes hold, I like doing it. And it's something that strictly speaking is going to make me a better professional. So, again, I think finding those types of activities and niches where you can kind of get like that cognitive break or what have you are super important. So I'm really trying to focus on like, again, what can I do that's, productive, but I'm having a good time doing it. And therefore it doesn't like really feel like work. And that is one of those things.
I love it. All right. Jonathan, this has been a fantastic interview. Thank you so much. How do people find you? How would they reach out to you? Where are you on social media? All that, please.
I mean, JD Stringfield on Twitter. I tweet about nothing specific, though I should probably change that. But I do think it's good content, strictly speaking. And then, again, stringfield.substack.com. It's my newsletter. It's free. Again, I'm writing, every week or two about, some combination of marketing, gaming, the business of gaming, esports, analytics, one of those things. So definitely check that out, because I think that's where, I'm going to increasingly be inflicting some of my projects out in the world.
Wonderful. All right. And as we're wrapping this up, do you have any final thoughts you want to share, or anything I didn't ask you think we still need to cover?
No, man. I mean, I think for your folks that are, on or watching the show or what have you, it's a vibrant space. There's a lot of room. I think it's just, there's a lot of people that can and should get into the industry. And again, concentrate on what you do well and focus on that and smash it. And again, it'll pay off for you. Long enough timeline, either in gaming or, some other industry where hopefully you'll find just as much edification.
Beautiful. All right, Jonathan Stringfield, thank you so much for coming on. I genuinely do appreciate you taking the time to work with us today.
Appreciate it, man. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And for everybody else, I'm going to remind you all, don't be just a gamer, be a gamerpreneur.